Before we step into tonight's story, take a second to subscribe to the channel. If you're drawn to stories layered with tension, emotion, and the kind of moments that linger long after the screen fades to black, you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and become part of this growing community. Every story here unfolds slowly, deliberately, so you don't just watch it, you feel it. Now let's begin. The penthouse was wrapped in a silence so complete it felt staged, like a carefully constructed illusion of peace suspended high above the restless city below. From the floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago shimmered in the distance. The skyline pulsed with quiet energy, headlights threading through streets like glowing veins, distant sirens dissolving into the night air before they could disturb the calm inside. Lena lay across the vast king-sized bed. The silk robe her husband had gifted her during a spring trip to Paris draped loosely over her shoulders. The fabric caught the low lamplight, reflecting it in soft gold ripples. Lavender from the diffuser on the dresser floated gently through the room, soothing on the surface, but unable to quiet the tension that had taken residence inside her chest. It was just after 9:30 p.m. The night felt suspended, waiting. Her fingers traced absent circles along the edge of a pillow as her thoughts drifted. Not in a straight line but in restless loops. There was a strange alertness in her body. Not fear. Not exactly anticipation. Something in between. Something unnamed. The quiet fractured. A door handle clicked. The sound was small, but in the stillness of the penthouse it echoed like a crack through glass. Lena's breath caught. A gym bag hit the hardwood floor with a dull thud. Heavy, unmistakable. Jared stood in the doorway, outlined by the warm light from the hallway behind him. His shirt clung slightly to his shoulders, darkened from a late workout. His hair was damp, his breathing uneven, not exhausted, but unsettled. Their eyes met. For a second too long. There are moments when silence becomes physical. When it presses against your skin, demanding acknowledgement. This was one of those moments. Neither of them looked away immediately. Neither of them spoke. Finally he cleared his throat. "I left something in here," he said, his voice rough around the edges. It was a sentence meant to dissolve tension. It didn't. Lena slowly pushed herself upright, pulling her robe closed with deliberate calm. She refused to rush. Refused to appear startled. "Your father's away until Friday," she said evenly. It could have been information. It could have been a reminder. It might have been a warning. Jared didn't respond right away. His jaw tightened subtly. Something unspoken flickered behind his eyes. Confusion, frustration, curiosity. Maybe all of it tangled together. He gave a short nod, turned, and walked back out. The door closed harder than necessary, the sound reverberating through the hallway and settling into the bones of the apartment. Lena remained still. Her pulse refused to slow. Whatever had just passed between them hadn't been accidental. It hadn't been imaginary either. It lingered in the air like electricity after lightning. Unseen but impossible to ignore. When she finally lay back against the pillows, staring at the ceiling, one thought anchored itself in her mind with quiet certainty. This isn't finished. 2 days passed. But time did nothing to dissolve what had shifted. The apartment felt different, charged. As though every room carried an awareness of what neither of them had dared to define. They sat across from each other at the dining table that evening. Takeout containers cooled between them, untouched. The overhead chandelier cast soft shadows that deepened the lines in Jared's expression. He kept his gaze lowered, pushing rice around his plate without eating. Lena studied him carefully. The tension in his shoulders. The restless bounce of his knee under the table. The way he inhaled like he was preparing to speak. And then didn't. "We should talk about it," she said at last. Her voice was calm, but it cut through the silence like glass. He looked up sharply. About what? But the question wasn't genuine. His grip tightened around his fork. About the way things changed. The words landed between them. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "I can't pretend it didn't." Neither could she. That was the problem. They spoke carefully after that. Measured sentences, deliberate pauses. They named boundaries out loud, like drawing lines in sand they both knew the tide could erase. "We don't cross anything," Lena said firmly. "Right," Jared agreed. "But agreement doesn't erase awareness. And awareness doesn't disappear just because you refuse to feed it. By the time they finished talking, the air felt heavier, not lighter. Boundaries had been spoken, but speaking something doesn't make it simple. Something had shifted, and naming it didn't undo it. The following afternoon unfolded slowly. Sunlight poured through the expansive windows, washing the penthouse in gold. Dust particles floated lazily in the beams, innocent and unaware of the tension woven into the space. Lena moved through the apartment with deliberate ease. She brewed coffee. She answered emails. She folded laundry. But she felt him, even when she didn't look. Jared sat at the kitchen island with his laptop open, textbooks spread around him. He tried to focus, highlighting lines, scrolling through notes, but his concentration fractured every time she passed behind him. Every small movement seemed amplified. The soft swish of her robe, the quiet clink of a coffee cup against marble, a glance that lasted half a second longer than necessary. It wasn't overt. It wasn't reckless. It was worse. It was controlled. By evening, the restraint itself had become exhausting. At 8:17 p.m., there was a soft knock at her bedroom door. Lena closed her eyes briefly before answering it. When she opened the door, Jared stood there, not defensive, not casual, just honest. "I can't focus," he admitted. She studied him for a long moment, then stepped aside. They sat on opposite ends of the couch. A movie played on the television, something neither of them would remember later. The dialogue blurred into background noise. The space between them was deliberate, measured, but alive. There's a difference between silence that's empty and silence that's full. The one wrapping around them that night was full, thick with restraint, with questions neither dared to voice. At one point, their hands brushed when reaching for the remote. Both froze. It was accidental. And yet, Lena stood abruptly. "That's enough," she said, her voice steady but edged with something fragile. Jared nodded immediately. Relief and frustration flickered across his face at the same time. He stood too. "Yeah, you're right." He left without argument. But neither of them slept easily. Morning light softened the sharp edges of the night before, but it didn't erase it. They moved around each other in the kitchen with careful politeness. The kind strangers use. Too respectful. Too distant. "Coffee?" she asked. "Sure." Two simple words. But beneath them was a silent acknowledgement. "We are standing on unstable ground." When Jared grabbed his bag and headed toward the door, Lena watched him. Not openly, but thoughtfully. He hesitated before leaving, like he wanted to say something more. Then he stepped into the hallway, and the door closed with quiet finality. The apartment felt too large afterward. Too quiet. Lena walked to the windows and stared out at the city below. From this height, everything looked controlled, organized into neat grids of streets and buildings. But she knew better. Appearances deceive. What had shifted between them wasn't dramatic. There had been no grand declarations, no impulsive decisions. Just awareness. Just gravity. And gravity doesn't ask permission before pulling. The days that followed became a careful dance. They avoided being alone in confined spaces. They kept conversations brief. They texted instead of speaking when possible. But avoidance only sharpened what they were trying to dull. One evening, as rain tapped softly against the glass, a power outage dimmed the penthouse into near darkness. Backup lights flickered on, casting everything in muted shadow. Lena found herself in the hallway at the same time Jared stepped out of his room. They both laughed softly at the coincidence. "It's just the storm," he said. "I know." But neither moved. In low light, barriers blur. Expressions become harder to read. Or maybe easier. "Do you ever wish things were simpler?" he asked suddenly. She didn't answer right away. "Simple doesn't mean right," she said finally. "And complicated doesn't mean wrong." The words hung between them. Dangerous. Honest. The storm outside intensified, thunder rolling across the sky like distant drums. For a moment, the world beyond the penthouse felt chaotic, unpredictable. Inside, it felt suspended. They stood closer than they had before. Not touching, just close enough to feel the warmth of shared breath. Lena stepped back first. "We made boundaries," she reminded him quietly. "I remember." And he did. That was the hardest part. By the time Friday approached and her husband's return loomed on the horizon, the tension had transformed into something deeper, quieter, but heavier. Not reckless, not acted upon, but undeniable. On Thursday night, Lena found herself unable to sleep. She walked into the living room, city lights blinking endlessly beyond the glass. She wrapped the silk robe tighter around herself. Footsteps sounded behind her. "Jared, I figured you'd be awake," he said. She didn't turn immediately. "You should get some rest." "So should you." They stood side